Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this third Gregorian Chant training class provided by the Latin Mass Society. And you're all very welcome. It's very nice to see people who have returned from last time, and also welcome some new people. I know some people are still coming in. My name is Matthew Schellhorn. I'm the Director of Music for London of the Latin Mass Society, and we have several initiatives going on in London, one of which is the new Schola, which we founded last year. And when lockdown happened, we decided to share some of the training opportunities. At the moment, the Schola has an opportunity to rehearse once a month and sing to masses on a regular basis, and other opportunities too. But I thought it would be good to open up the learning during lockdown, and this is really the beginning, I hope, of a greater provision online of sacred music presentations and classes. Now tonight at 9:30 there will be an online celebration of Compline, much as we did a couple of months ago. And what I'm trying to do is just go through the various component parts of the office of Compline. It's a refresher for people who are familiar with Compline and the Divine Office and chant in general. And it's also an opportunity for people who have never really either had a chance to study the chant or not had a chance to focus on certain corners of the repertoire. This class is going to be recorded, is being recorded. We'll go onto YouTube like the others. So I will assume a general knowledge, bearing in mind that people may see it at other points, and I hope will find it useful. So everybody of any standard, I hope, will be able to get something from it. But if you're attending the class in real time, as it were, you're very welcome to ask questions, and I'll try to clarify anything as we go along. And bearing that in mind, we will use the chat box to do so. So I've muted everyone just to avoid some background noise. I was very happy to talk directly, but the main way we can interact as we go along, at least, is if you want to go up to view and show the chat, and you can drag and resize that box, and you can communicate with the whole group, and that's quite helpful because then everybody can see the question. So I would encourage you to do that if anything is unclear. If you'd like to go ahead and test that now, drop us all a line, name, location. It might be helpful also if you just indicate what previous experience you have, where your enthusiasms lie in sacred music. We've got Sarah saying good evening to everyone. I remember you, Sarah, from last time, and your very astute answers. And Sarah, welcome. I think we've got someone from the Schola, the London Schola, Christopher, as well. Andrea sings in London. Excellent. And that's one of the good things about having an online class, is that right now we can open these up to anyone from anywhere, really, and it's the Latin Mass Society of England and Wales, but why not the Latin Mass Society of the entire universe? And then, of course, obviously anybody online can watch it too. So, for the benefit of those who weren't here last time, people watching online for the first time, and also just to recap for anybody who attended last time, we're discussing Compline in the traditional rite of the Roman liturgy. Compline's the last office of the day, traditionally said about now, in a monastic community after Vespers, after supper, just before retiring. Can be sung in choir, it can be sung together with other people, not in a church, or it can be sung alone. And I hope that these classes will help people to take up the baton of singing the chant. We'll be using the text of the Roman Breviary from 1960 according to the Code of Rubrics that was published the same year. There was a previous arrangement of the Divine Office dating, I think, from 1910, and in some respects this edition of the breviary that we're using is a slightly simplified version of that. And the text can be found in the breviary if you're fortunate enough to have one. Sometimes Vespers and Compline are the back of Sunday missals. And as I was saying last time, I would encourage you to make use of the website divinumofficium.com, where if you visit, it looks a bit like this, and you can click through on desktop. You can see there it's set up for today. That's the 8th Sunday after Pentecost. It's a second class feast, and today is actually the feast of Saint Anne, the mother of the Blessed Virgin Mary. So you can see it's been commemorated at today's liturgy, and I'll say a bit more about that actually during the celebration of Compline. I've set it up there to the bottom. You can see that the rubrics are from 1960. That means all of the texts are according to that more recent distribution. You can set the translations English if you speak Spanish or Italian. You can have it there too alongside. So it's an incredibly good resource. And there we are, set out for tonight. If anybody does double back and wants to follow Compline, they can either do that with the chant as on the screen later or on that website. And last time I provided a kind of a roadmap actually for the office, and took everybody through the route just to get that familiar in our mind. It begins with an introduction, then there's a raft of psalms which we studied as well, then there's a hymn which the second class was on, second chant class was on last time, short reading, and several bits following. And you can see that the canticle, that's the Nunc Dimittis, is what I'm calling number 6 there. So it's a good way through. It's very close to the end of the office, actually. It's a very apt text to be concluding the day with. There's the final destination, finishing with the Marian antiphon, which at the moment is the Salve Regina. But when we did it before, it was the Regina Coeli, because we were still within Pentecost. So that was how we continued. And this is where we're stopping today. We're stopping here. So the repertoire for this office comes from the Antiphonale Romanum, which was last on the shelves of W.H. Smith in 1919. But all of these things are on the internet now. More of that in a minute. And a feature of the office is that when it's being sung, it's not sung by everyone all the time, and it's perfectly possible to participate actually by not singing everything, and that will come across very obviously in a monastic community, because often these things go from side to side in the church in a way that's called antiphonal singing, and that's of course where the word antiphonale comes from. So opposing sound groups from side to side of the church. And yes, of course, singing Gregorian chant requires general knowledge, but as a rule, particularly at Compline, the chants are on the simpler side. And I'll come back to this point in a minute, but there are some variations, and that happens from day to day in the week, and it also happens according to the season, the church's season in the year, and that does introduce a certain amount of complexity into the music. That's as it should be. I often say to my scholar members that life would be just incredibly boring if going to church involved the same thing all of the time, and that's one of the wonderful things about the traditional Roman office and the Mass, for that matter, is there's a very well proportioned amount of variation. The variations happen often enough so one doesn't get bored, but they don't happen erratically, and they certainly don't happen at the whim of whichever person happens to be supposedly in charge that day. They are decided for, as my job as a director of music is, I better not say it's relatively straightforward, because that means that my job might get taken over by anybody else, the next man. It's highly hard. It's highly complex, actually. A lot of hard work, and nobody else could possibly do it. But what I mean is, a lot of the hard work in terms of choices is taken away from us, and that variety is more to do with the variety that's preordained. Now, the music can be found, again, if the text can be found on one website, the music can be found on another website, and there's the link there. When I send around the slides, you'll be able to go online and find that page, and there it is set up again for today. Very, very clever website. You can punch in the date, you can punch in the day, you can say whether there is a priest or deacon present or not. If you, for instance, if you were singing it at home on your own, it will automatically tell you what the season is and how that affects the music. And in terms of the Nunc Dimittis, a little bit about the background there. This is what people might otherwise have heard called the Canticle of Simeon. It's to be found in St. Luke's Gospel, chapter 2, and it partners really the other great canticles of the New Testament. They are the Magnificat, the Canticle of Mary, and the Benedictus, the Canticle of Zachary. So, in order, the Benedictus is ordained for Lauds, morning prayer, and the Magnificat is ordained for Vespers, and the Nunc Dimittis is ordained for Compline. That's in the Roman Rite. So these are more elaborate, more poetic texts that were latched onto as particularly appropriate for melodic treatment, largely in the same way as the Psalms, and I'll come back to that point too. They are styled the evangelical canticles. And yes, they get their names from the first few words in the Latin Vulgate, so Nunc Dimittis. And yes, as I said, in the Roman office, this canticle is assigned to Compline, but not in the version of Compline used by St. Benedict, which didn't have a canticle. So there are slight differences in the monastic office still to this day, where they use their own version of the office, and Vespers has the Magnificat. In fact, it has 4 psalms, not 5, like the Roman office, and Compline has psalmody, but it doesn't have a canticle. But obviously we're singing the Roman office, so that's why we sing the Nunc Dimittis at it. And it's that very, very ripe liturgical text. It's highly symbolic, light to the revelation of the Gentiles, It's used at Candlemas for the blessing of the candles, and it's also partnered with a very beautiful antiphon on either side, which for those who were at the presentation on psalmody will remember. Antiphons surround the psalms, and they also surround canticles. The interesting thing about that is that the antiphons are generally a non-biblical New Testament type text. They may be biblical, but basically they are New Testament, often surrounding. If they surround a psalm, then clearly you are bracketing an Old Testament text with a New Testament text. The interesting thing here is that in the case of the canticles, what you have is effectively New Testament texts, Christological texts surrounding New Testament texts, if you like, providing further gloss on the meaning of the New Testament, the biblical text, and that's provides a depth of meaning, because the canticles are often themselves based upon Old Testament texts, and are alluding to prophecies. So it's like a kind of a further gloss on the New Testament. And that little unassuming bullet point is probably the best news of the day and the chant lesson, because in the case of the Nunc Dimittis, it's worth pointing out that there is no variation according to day or season. It is identical at every single instance of its performance. And that means it's highly easy to memorize and to get used to, and the tone doesn't change, and the melody doesn't change, and the text doesn't change. That's not like the Psalms, even at Compline, which is, as I've said, relatively straightforward. There are different psalms for each day, and the hymn melody might change, and other bits and bobs. But not in the case of the canticle. And yes, that's the singers looking both holy and happy at the prospect of singing the invariable Nunc Dimittis. So here we are. This is laid out as I will present it later on. You can see at the top there we have the antiphon: Salva nos Domine vigilantes, custodi nos dormientes, ut vigilemus cum Christo et requiescamus in pace. And in the middle there we have the actual canticle itself, and at the bottom the other piece of sandwich bread going on the other side that's sung afterwards. That was as we had it for Pentecost, but the only variety, if you like, in this moment is whether or not to sing Alleluia. And of course we're outside of Easter time now, so that will not be sung. I mean, Alleluia will not be sung as a part of the presentation of the Nunc Dimittis, but the canticle itself doesn't change at all. So I thought I'd say a few things here about what one might be looking for and what's worth remembering when one gets to this moment in the office. First of all, as usual, one would notice the markings by the beginning of the antiphon, and there we have the number 3 and the letter A. And what that is telling us is that the melody of the Nunc Dimittis is sung according to the 3rd psalm tone, and more of that in a minute. And the ending of the melody is the one that ends on an A. So that letter A actually refers to the last note. So if you look at the end of the first verse of music, secundum verbum tuum in pace, you can see that the final note is an A. which is 2 notes below a C, which is positioned on the top line. So there is the third tone, the third psalm tone. And effectively every verse will be sung according to that. Now there are obviously resonances of our class on psalmody. So what I'm about to say, some of that will slot with what we learnt before, some of it will differ, as will become clear. There's the third tone, and I'll sing that through myself in a second. It looks a little bit daunting. This is a page from the Liber Usualis. A little bit daunting. It's designed to simplify matters. It's describing how the psalm begins. That's where it says intonation. It's telling you where the reciting note is, the tenor. The tenor is the note that is held, or if you like, the note that is holding, that you recite on. And where it flexes, so if there is a flex sign, that's that little cross, a little dagger sign. And then where it comes to a mediation, or mediant, and that's the midpoint, where the asterisk is there. After where it says mediant, that is the first half of the psalm verse. And then you can see we return to the tenor, we're reciting again. And then this is the bit that I think throws people often, and this is the termination. And you can see there are 5 terminations. Often people tend to associate one of those terminations with the melody, and then that's the one that they default to when they sing. And it's on those occasions where that might differ from what's been what it should be, that they're the occasions when scholars and choirs and sanctuaries and communities get themselves in a pickle, because you've got one member of the choir resolutely sticking to the melody that they know, and everybody else aware of the indication to sing, one of them in particular, and then a clash at the end, and often it goes on and on and on in my experience. But what we're looking at here, because we've got our beady eyes going at the beginning of the antiphons, we're looking at this one that says A. It's interesting really, because there are 2 A's here, and for that matter 2 G's. In other words, there are 2 melodies, 2 versions of the third tone which end on an A. One is called A and one is called A2. They both end on an A, but they end on an A in a different way. And the same goes for G. We have one that comes down to G, the note G, and we have another one that comes down to a G, but in a slightly different way. This is again where I point out, and everybody breathes a huge sigh of relief, that in the case of the Nunc Dimittis at Compline, there is only one ending, one possible ending. But I just thought I'd throw this back up, because it's well worth reiterating. Psalm tones themselves, there may not be very many, 7, but there are multiple terminations for them, and that is where the tricky thing lies. So the melody, if I sing it through, we go up to a reciting note. If there is a flex, we take a short break. And then we carry on, and we put the mediant to the melody that goes da 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 dee. Then we carry on reciting after the asterisk. And in the case of the Nunc Dimittis at Compline, we terminate in this way. And that's the melody. Da dee da 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 dee da 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 dee da da. That's rather a familiar melody, I think. I mean, for anybody who sings the office, that's a pretty straightforward one. It's when you get to the 2s that you have to worry about. But as I say, that doesn't apply. Now I've coloured this moment here with a different colour. This is the intonation. This is the beginning of the tone, and this is perhaps the most important thing about chanting canticles. So this doesn't just go for the Nunc Dimittis, it also goes for the Magnificat, also goes for the Benedictus. On account of their importance and their status in terms of fulfillment of prophecy, and I think also out of deference to the biblical figures who uttered the texts that we're singing. Each verse of a canticle begins with an intonation. That's significant because the psalmody, if anyone will recall from last time, the psalmody always begins after the first verse. The psalmody then continues at the beginning of every verse, just on the tenor. In other words, in a psalm that begins da dee da 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 dee da 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 da, it would carry on ya da 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 dee da dee da dee. It would carry on the tenor. But in the case of the Nunc Dimittis, and again the other canticles, each verse begins with the intonation. That is another point of confusion often amongst scholars, and apologies for those who know this point or know all of the points so far, but also I just think it's worth emphasising for those who watch it on the YouTube. So when I'm looking at my Nunc Dimittis, I'm shown there in the software. If I'm fortunate to have the software, it's pointed out to me the beginning of the psalm. In a sense, that doesn't. The canticle, but in a sense that doesn't differ from any other psalmody that I might come across. There would be some differentiation in the typesetting, either underlined or italicized, and then there's the beginning of the mode. But at the end of the line, as you can see where I've circled and highlighted it in the text where it says verse 2, it's telling me there that I have to remember to intone the melody every single verse. So I'm looking for the same differentiation in the text. In the case of this typesetter, it's italics. Like I say, sometimes it might be underlined. And you can see there are two neumes. There's a G, and then there's an A and a C coming together. Da da. And so I'm expecting to see two syllables that are differentiated. And here we have quia, going with that. Verse 4, I'll come back to verse 3 in a minute. Verse 4, lumen, and gloria, and it would carry on, sicut. So without exception, there are always two syllables that are differentiated. But it would not be quia viderunt oculi, lumen ad revelatio, gloria patri, like a psalm. That's what a psalm would do. Instead, quia viderunt, lumen ad revelatio, gloria patri. It would be given a certain amount of differentiation. Now, can I just check everybody's on board and no burning questions about this so far before I carry on? If anybody wants to speak and say anything about these issues? All good with Sarah? Jolly good. And the other Sarah, I presume? And it's good to see some new people. Is it Davis or Davis and Mirtha? I think you were with us last time, but couldn't stay for all of it, so that's great. Sarah says fascinating. Fascinating. Oh, I think that should be emblazoned on the YouTube. That's great. And then I'm going to say a little bit now about the fiddly bit in the middle. Now this is what was called excellent. Oh, there we are. Another adjective to emblazon. yes, the median. This is something that is again can be a bone of contention, but there was nothing specifically different about this in the Nunc Dimittis than in the psalmody. But I thought I'd just say a few things about it because it has one particular bearing on the Nunc Dimittis, which you'll see in a second. So the median, the midpoint, it has it's a mediant of two accents. That means that there are two emphases in the melody. You can see there, I marked them coloured in mediant, just to focus our minds on it, and then I've coloured in the two accents. So if you remember, these accents relate to the stress in the texts, where the words are stressed. So when it says a mediant of two accents, what that means is that the melody is differentiated after the tenor at the final two syllables of the text before the midpoint of the psalm or the canticle, where the asterisk is. So it relates to, it might be two words, it might be two words each of two syllables, it may be two words each of three syllables, it may be one of two syllables, one of three syllables, but the accents are what we're counting here. And for that reason, there are possibly going to be some spare reciting notes. Now, they are the ones in white underneath the mediant, within the mediant bracket there. These have special notes. They're called puncta cava, so they are empty points or cave-like notes. They are caverns of dots on the score. The white notes there, and they are the spare ones. So if I go back to the I put a big exclamation mark, which will you'll see why that's very important in a second. If I go back to the Nunc Dimittis, we're looking at the first verse, Nunc Dimittis servum tuum Domine. So we can see there that the two stresses before the red asterisk in the middle, the midpoint, the two stresses are do, counting backwards, do of Domine and tu of tuum. And that is the point. Tuum is the point where the melody stops reciting. So it's been reciting since Dimittis servum, and then it starts to do what it's required to do in order to come to a midpoint. So it goes up by a tone, then down by a semitone, down by a tone, back up by a minor third. And that's the case in verse 2. Oculi is the first one, and mei. I'm going into this in a bit of detail because sometimes one isn't fortunate to have the bolds and the italics. So sometimes people rely on the bolds and italics that they've seen in the Liber or they've had provided in a typeset version. And then when they are required to sing it just to text, or they're, let's say, practicing a psalm tone with a psalm that they're not familiar with very much, or that can happen even in the Liber. Some moments aren't actually pointed; they're not indicated for the psalm tones. The theory of the situation is just not there for them to apply. So, as I say again, in the case of this third tone, we're counting back from the asterisk. We're finding the words. We're finding the two last stressed syllables. In the case of verse 4, revelationem gentium is the other two, onem and gentium, patri Filio and Nunc et Semper, and you can see a very good example of the spare notes. In fact, I'll open this up. Why don't I do this? So we'll open this up. I'm expecting Sarah Ward is going to be the first person to answer because that's the tradition in these classes. Let's see if somebody new can beat her to it. I doubt it. Let's know which are the verses that will have extra syllables in. Yes, thank goodness for the bolds and the italics, but even with the bolds and the italics, can we spot where the puncta cava might be useful? I'll give you a clue. So it's not verse 6. So we have Nunc et semper. And you can see there it goes up and back down to the reciting note, and then straight into the bracketed moment. It misses the first reciting note of the bracketed moment out. Anybody like a stab at the empty syllables? I feel rather proud. If I've managed to come up with a question that nobody can answer, that means that class is of some use, because I get to impart the answer. Okay, so I'm looking at verse 2. Oculi, o would go up, and culi would come back down. And as you can see from verse 1, we would have to hang around on the reciting note, as it were, as we come before we move on may. We'd have to hang around for a bit extra. If I just go back to the previous, if I can actually, I'm not sure I can. No, maybe I can't. But we have spare notes there. Unlike verse 4, onem. We'll get to the third verse in a minute, Davis. The third verse is the culmination of the class. It's the most exciting thing possible to imagine about the Nunc Dimittis. But verse 4, onem, there's just 2 notes. So it's very different from verse 2. Oculi has 3 notes. So there we would have to do spares. Let me just sing verse 2 up to the asterisk. Quia viderunt oculi mei, oculi. Have to slot in an extra note there. Verse 4, lumen ad revelationem gentium. Don't have to slot anything in there at all. So there's a difference there. These are all the stressed ones. As I was saying, I'm trying to just point out what I would be looking for straight away if I were singing this in context. Let's talk about verse 3. Verse 3, as I've said, is the most exciting thing possible. As you can see, verse 3 just has 2 words, quod parasti. Well, of course, there isn't room to sing the intonation there. Just isn't room at all. You can't sing quod parasti, and you run out of melody, or run out of text. Yes, there's too much melody for the text. So here, because of our rule of counting back from the asterisk to the final 2 syllables before the asterisk, well, of course, that takes us right back to the beginning of the verse. So we have to begin at the first note. Well, we're beginning at the mediant. We're beginning after the tenor. We've not had an intonation. We've had no tenor, and we're beginning straight in with the mediant. So that's a good example. That does happen in other psalms too, and it's a very good example of what to do on those occasions. It's interesting, isn't it? I guess Latin is often about the endings, and again, this is a very good example of where the music is almost following the same principle. It's working from the back of the text to find its own meaning, and you're basing your practice entirely on the ends of the phrases, which is it's almost back to front to our mentality in English, because often we begin by expressing what we mean, but Latin is very succinct in that respect, and the music is it's going along with the same principle. So I thought I'd finish my side of things by just singing through, and you can join in on your own while I'm doing this. I'm going to sing through the antiphon and the canticle itself all the way through, and then I'll open the floor for a few questions or comments. So here we go. Salva nos Domine vigilantes, custodi nos dormientes, ut vigilemus cum Christo, et requiescamus in pace. Nunc Dimittis servum tuum, Domine, secundum verbum tuum in pace, quia viderunt oculi mei, salutare tuum, quod parasti, ante faciem omnium populorum, lumen ad revelationem gentium, et gloriam plebis tuae Israel, gloria Patri et Filio, et Spiritui Sancto, sic ut erat in principio et nunc et semper, et in saecula saeculorum. Amen. Salva nos Domine vigilantes, custodi nos dormientes, ut vigilemus cum Christo, et requiescamus in pace. I think over the page there it is in full. Okay, so just wondered before we close and move on in a short while to the live Compline, if there's any clarifications needed there about the singing of the Canticle at Compline. That's great. I shall assume it's all clear. There was one small point, which was just that it's of interest, isn't it, that the antiphon itself begins very similarly to the which is not always the case, but the antiphon, as you can see, begins very similarly to the melody of the canticle, the third tone, but also kind of branches out. It goes higher and it goes lower, kind of surrounds it in lots of different ways. I think it's a fair observation. Thank you very much for watching. I do hope that everyone of whatever prior standards has learnt something new. I will send the slides by email, and also, as I've said, this will be posted online if you want to recap. 21:30 there will be a live celebration of Compline. I look forward to seeing you there. And if there are any comments on today or suggestions for future classes, email me at dirmusic@nms.org.uk, and you can keep up to date on the Latin Mass and everything Latin Mass by visiting the Latin Mass Society's website, nms.org.uk. And thank you very much. Thank you for all kind comments. Bye bye.